let's take a step back just for 1 second and enjoy all of this greenery here. Now, of course, we're excited about these green stalk Yukon gold potatoes. Getting ready to dig for gold. Guten gardening, everybody. Well, it's been just under 2 weeks since we last gave you a full garden tour, and today I want to show you some of the changes that have occurred in just 2 weeks, even without a lot of rain. So let's go ahead and take a look at where our garden is here toward the end of July. I want to start with our peppers, because this one bed of peppers, we're now in the stage of patience for them to turn colors, because we have so many nice frying peppers. Let's take a look right down in here. So many nice sized peppers on these plants, and so really, again, that's all we're looking for now, is that transformation where they start to change colors. But there's lots of blossoms on here. There are so many more, I think, that are going to develop here soon. And our okra plants are now, most of them are about 8 to 10 inches tall. Remember, these are dwarf okra that we planted in here, and so they're only going to get about 3 feet tall. But what we're really looking forward to now, and you can start to see it here, here's one, and this one has two. We're going to see those blossoms, the flowers starting to form here over the next couple of weeks, I think. Yep, and we'll look down at this biggest one here. You can just see all that growth coming in. And so I would imagine by the next time we do a tour, we're going to have the foundations of some okra on here. Now, one of my favorite spots in the front yard and space here is our vertical garden, our green stalk vertical garden, and you can see our sweet potatoes are really developing nicely. We have some good deep green color in here. The leaves are expanding out, and so that means that we're getting, I would say, better development than we got when we grew them indoors. We're still only a fraction of the way along with this, but they're looking really nice. And up at the top of this green stalk, you can see the volunteer zucchini. Last time I just had the initial foundation of a couple of the zucchini, but now this one could be harvested any time. Look at that beauty. Again, this is a volunteer zucchini in a green stalk. And here at the top on the other side of the green stalk, we have 2 tomato plants, and these are Tiny Tim dwarf tomatoes. So they're really small. They don't get all that big. This came to us from one of our community members. They gave us a couple of seeds. This is one of the seeds they gave us, and you can see the beginnings of some blossoms here. So we'll see what those look like. This little cherry tomato here again very shortly. All right, check this out. This is a DIY vertical garden. We've been using this for the last 2 years. Just a really simple setup with tomato cage, one of the heavier duty tomato cages, and a nice grow bag on top. And in here we've got kale, 2 different types. This is our lacinato kale. Take a look at the beauty of these. These are ready to be harvested for sure. And then around the other side here we have collard greens that we planted. Again, look at the leaves on here. I really enjoy the taste of collard greens. I know you have to cook them down quite a bit in order to get them to taste the way you want them to, but I grew up with them. This is something I definitely enjoy. This is a really simple way to get some good greens into your system, and these are developing so well, especially over the last 2 weeks. Now, one thing I had to keep in mind for this is I definitely want to keep this really well watered, because it is a container. It dries out pretty quickly. All right, let's see what the last 2 weeks has done to our grapes. Now you can see we didn't trim this back at all, so there's not a lot of great air circulation through here. So I've had to come in and trim back some of the grapes that have gotten a little moldy. That's one of the downsides to not pruning this back. But we have quite a few grapes now that are at the size they're going to be. They're full size now, so we're just waiting on the process of them to ripen up. Others in here still have some growing to do, but as I look at the 2 varieties that are growing over the arch here, I can see plenty of deliciousness that we're going to be able to enjoy soon. And for us, it doesn't seem to matter how many grapes we grow. They don't typically make it into the house because they are so quickly eaten. How about you? If you grow grapes, do you ever get them actually inside your house to preserve? Last week we released a video about our sweet potatoes. We talked about the different ways that we were growing them, how many we were growing this year, and this bed, I would say in the span of what seems like 2 to 3 days, has really increased its ground cover. You can see the apical ends of these. These are a vining variety. They're starting to spread everywhere along this bed. And in addition to that, the tomato varieties that we planted up along the trellises here, and each trellis has its own tomato plant. They seem to be coming along really nicely, developing nicely. And the peppers that are along the side, and we have 22 pepper plants. They're finally starting to develop blossoms. Here you go. You see the blossom underneath here. And it looks like they're getting ready to put on some fruit as well. So this bed, by the day, is really improving, is really looking healthier and healthier. One thing that I did just this past week, I made some compost tea, and I came in here and poured it into each of the holes where we have our sweet potatoes. The idea being that we're adding some more life to the mixture that's in here, and so we're keeping it nicely fertilized, as well as really a great living medium for these sweet potatoes to grow in. Now, the last time I was out here, our black currants and our pink champagne currants were getting ready to be ripe, and our gooseberries were still a couple of weeks away. Let's take a look at them now. Even though I don't love the taste of the black currants whenever they are fresh off the vine, one thing I can say about these black currants, and they're all ready now. Take a look at all that potential jam there. What I can say about this and the pink champagne currants, which I definitely have a preference for, when they start producing fruit, and ours started within that, first, even second year was really nice. They are loaded down. I love that fact about these. Our birds have not really bothered with them. I don't know if that surprises you, but it kind of surprises me because they are tasty, and the birds, we have plenty of birds around here. Now, our gooseberries are another fruit that absolutely gets loaded down, and you can see this is when we like to start harvesting them. When they start to shift color a little bit, they get a little softer. You can see the difference between one that's ripe, this one's not, and one that is. There's a kind of a reddish color, it gets really soft. There, you can see two of them right there. They're super sweet when they're ripe. We actually have 4 different varieties of grapes that we're growing. I don't usually show all of them, but this is another one. You can see developing, again, tons of grapes on here. And this is just on a DIY trellis using some of our lattice work. It's about 8 feet tall, and these grapes grow the entire 8 feet for sure in one season. Look at those beauties. I cannot wait to see how they taste. Now, because this video is a tour, it's not as extensive when it comes to the description of everything that's planted in here. So I want you to be encouraged to go back to our potato video we released recently, a tour on our potatoes, so you can understand just how important this bed is. This is our roof stout bed, and you can see the wind has come along today and sort of separated out, laid these over, but they'll be back, they'll be fine once that wind calms down. But these are potatoes growing just in hay, and I would say in the past 2 weeks, we've seen at least a foot of growth. All right, we're gonna move from the side of our property to the back of our property where we have our main garden space. One of my favorite early season vegetables is the asparagus that you see here. You can see it's definitely gone to seed. We've allowed it to go to seed. We've got lots of seed pods on here. Once these turn red or orangish color, we'll start to harvest them and save the seeds. I did a video all about asparagus and the seeds. I'm going to encourage you to check that out as well. As a gardener who grows a lot of brassicas, one of the things I love to see is that nice deep green color showing me the health of my plants in here. And if I'm growing Brussels sprouts like these, one of the things I love to see are those baby sprouts starting to form. Now, we have grown brassicas in this area before. One of the reasons why people talk about not growing things like cabbage, for example, in the same spot is because you can pass disease on from generation to generation. And of course, the other thing is that whenever you're in the garden planting something in the same spot as you did the previous year, you have to keep in mind the need to replace the nutrients that have been pulled out of the soil. And so that's something we've been keeping a close eye on. And I think you can see, based on the health of these plants, and here's some KK cross cabbage, the health of these plants shows that we've kept them nicely fed during this time. Now, in an earlier tour video where I talked about the 18 to 20 different varieties of tomatoes we have growing this year, I said that we were growing a lot more of the larger tomatoes instead of cherry tomatoes, which is something new for us. But one of the other things we're trying to do is, and I mentioned this as well, we're trying to trim these back and keep them pruned in a way that's going to increase the air circulation. It's going to reduce the amount of potential disease on these plants, and just in general reduce some of that excess foliage so we can focus on growing tomatoes and not necessarily just the green part of the plant. So I want to show you what this looks like up close. I think this trophy tomato is a really good example of what this pruning looks like. So you can see we have taken all of the lateral stems here toward the base of the plant and removed those, while at the same time we've left the suckers. That's the little stem that shoots out diagonally between the lateral stem and the main stems here. So we've left all the suckers on here, but we've removed all of that excess foliage at the bottom. And you can see what this looks like over here in compost row. Down from our compost where we have 8 or 9 different varieties of tomatoes growing, you can see all that space down here at the bottom where all those leaves have been removed. And our theory is that this should help to reduce some of the problems we have with things like early blight, which has been a problem for us in the past with some of our tomato plants. So we're reducing that potential contact with the ground while still giving them plenty of opportunity to flourish. Now this is one of the first times where we're focusing on growing these larger tomatoes, so we'd love to hear in the comments how you like to keep your tomatoes pruned. Cucumbers are one of those plants that look like nothing is happening, like they're not developing at all, and then suddenly they take off. These cucumbers in particular did not look very good at all when we planted them. These are ones that we purchased. It took them a while to get started, but now that they have, let's take a look at this plant here. You can see we have a couple of cucumbers on here, so we're going to get some actual cucumbers on this plant. This one is not quite there yet. You can see all the male flowers, and I can tell they're male flowers because there is no fruit underneath. That's the big difference between the male and the female cucumbers. Oh, there we go. That's going to be a cucumber here. So one thing I have to make sure I do, now that they're big enough to start spreading out, I've got them beside this trellis for a reason. I've got to affix them to the trellis so they grow up and over the trellis instead of just spreading out and trying to take over the rest of the garden space here. These are volunteer pole beans. The ones that are a little bit deeper green and not quite as far along yet, these are pole lima beans. And so we are growing 2 rows of those lima beans this year. We don't typically grow that many lima beans, but this is a variety that we got from Gurney's, and so we want to try that out. One of the other things that I love to start seeing is when our cabbage starts forming the head, and you can start to see the leaves beginning to wrap in, and that's how you know, and I can already feel right in here, that's going to be a really nice tight head. It's funny, I'm looking at this and I had to stop and take a picture of it. I love the way this looks. This lush greenery makes me so happy to be out here, especially considering now we're looking at maybe what, a month away from harvesting some of this. Now here in the back behind our main garden space, we've got our onions. We've got a couple of 100 onions that we planted. We've got yellow, white, and we've also got some red in here. And as we're getting closer to harvest, one of the things that I want to do is come back in here and I want to trim back these greens about 6 or 8 inches. Now the reason I'm doing this isn't because I think it's going to bulk up the onions. In fact, I think these onions are about as big as they're going to be, but they are going to start falling over soon. In fact, some of them have already started falling over. And before that happens, I want to get as many of these greens as possible, because what we do is we take these in, we cut them into smaller pieces, and we dehydrate them. And a couple of things you can do with that. One, you can keep them in that 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch size, and you can use those in soups. Or one of the things we've done in the past as well is to grind them up into a really nice powder that we can use again in soups, or use however you want to use as an onion powder. Now if I don't do this, once we actually harvest these onions and we set them out to cure, all of this is just going to shrivel away and be wasted. So that's why I'm out here taking these off. Again, not to increase the size of the bulb, so I think that's a garden myth, but instead to go through here and get some additional harvest. Our Heritage Red Raspberry is looking great right now, and actually there aren't that many raspberries on here, but that's only because over the last 3 days I have picked over 3.5 pounds of berries off of this, off of our black raspberry, and off of my favorite, the golden raspberry. And I was just doing some simple calculations by looking online to see how much these organic raspberries are going for. And in our area, what I found was most were about $4.50 to $5 per 6 ounces. So that's $30 or $40 worth of berries I've collected. All right, I'm gonna pop over to the garden at the back of our house. This is a partial sun garden where we grow some of our Kohlrabi. And in 2 weeks, we went from just the foundations of a ball of Kohlrabi to one that's about 2.5 inches. This one can go another couple of weeks. The other ones in here are starting to also expand. We don't have necessarily a consistent size yet, but we're at least 1.5 inches for all of these. I mentioned our sweet potato video earlier, so again, I won't say too much because I really want to encourage you to go check out that video on the way in which we're growing sweet potatoes, and check out our video on the ways in which we're growing potatoes, because we have some awesome experiments this year and you're going to see lots and lots of cool potato development. I mean, these are getting ready to flower. Here is one of our experiments between certified and store-bought potatoes. But our beds are really taking off. Vertical, in-ground, raised bed, you name it, we're growing potatoes and sweet potatoes in it. And I highly encourage you to check that out if you want to learn more. Well, I guess technically a weed is anything you didn't plant or you don't want growing wherever it is that you're gardening. And this sunflower is something that we didn't plant. So I guess technically this could be considered a weed, but we let this continue to grow. So congratulations, my friend, you're no longer considered a weed. This is right beside our big purple sweet potato bed, which is just looking absolutely lush right now. But I'm really excited for this flower on top to open up. I love sunflowers. I love the taste of sunflower seeds, but it's not every day that you get a volunteer sunflower. And once we saw that coming up, and I would say in the last 2 weeks it's probably doubled in size, we had to keep it. And one thing that doesn't usually make me very happy is when I start to see plants dying, unless we're talking about potato plants nearing the end of their life cycle. And you can see we've got a combination of varieties in this bed. This is our modified root style compost bed here. And since in this bed we have a variety of potatoes that we've planted in here, we've got different timelines going on, but they'll all be ready to go when we're ready to harvest here in the not too distant future. Now, of course, we're excited about these green stalk Yukon gold potatoes, getting ready to dig for gold, but in the last couple of weeks they've really started to develop and expand out. And one of the things we did last year was to find a DIY way to hold these potato stems in place using some of this thin wire and also using some bamboo sticks. And I'm going to put a link to that video in the description. But if you're gentle when installing this metal, it's a great way to keep them from damage from storms and excess wind. And that's something we want to do. We want to keep them nice and healthy until they're ready to be harvested. Let's take a step back just for 1 second and enjoy all of this greenery here from our potatoes and our sweet potatoes. Isn't that lovely? I think the last area I want to show you here in our garden today in this tour is just how our sweet potatoes and then the tomatoes that we've once again pruned back up in that same method, just to show you how they're doing in our long raised bed. Initially, when I built these raised beds about 2 years ago and we did the planting, we put a whole bunch of sticks and other material at the bottom of the bed. And one of the things that we didn't really take into consideration as much as we should have last year was just how much that composting was going to leach the nitrogen out of the soil. And so the end result last year was that our plants in these beds struggled more than they should. There wasn't that nice deep green. They just didn't thrive. Well, we took that into account this year, and you can see the beauty of these plants. I mean, they are certainly performing well so far. Those tomatoes are about 2.5 feet tall at this point, and our sweet potatoes are looking fantastic. But that's got me wondering if any of you have ever struggled with a brand new raised bed with those same problems. You know, you can test the soil, but if you have a lot of that medium that's going to be decomposing, going to be breaking down underneath, because that's a much less expensive way to start than just loading up the soil, have you then had to deal with your plants not doing as well as you would have hoped in that soil? Well, folks, with the nice warm weather that we're having out right now, if we could get some rain, that would be super helpful, but I can't complain too much. Our garden is looking great, and I would say in the next couple of weeks our harvests are going to really pick up speed. If there are questions that we didn't answer in today's tour, please leave us a comment and let us know, and we'll do our best to respond. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.